Prices continue to climb with no big discounts in sight.
When you have folks continuing to move here, that creates need for housing.
Connor Devereaux with Homes.com and the data company CoStar tells us
flashbulbs lit up the room as Governor Katie Hobbs stepped up to the podium, her voice tight, her hands trembling. Reporters shouted questions about the housing collapse, why buyers were abandoning contracts, why home prices were falling faster than anyone predicted. Behind her, screens showed the damage. Nearly half of Phoenix listings sitting unsold, values sinking month after month. The desert dream had turned into a disaster, and the governor was visibly unraveling under the pressure. The question everyone's asking, how did Arizona's hottest market turn into the state's biggest meltdown overnight? When politics meets panic, the cameras were rolling, the microphones were hot, and Governor Katie Hobbs stood under the blinding lights trying to hold herself together. You could see it in her eyes, that mix of disbelief and exhaustion that no press briefing can hide. Reporters were firing questions one after another about Arizona's unraveling real estate market, and for a split second, she froze. The same governor who once bragged about record growth and booming housing numbers was suddenly on the defensive. Every chart, every statistic behind her told the same ugly truth. The Arizona dream was cracking fast. The meltdown didn't happen all at once. It was the kind of slow burn you could feel building for weeks. Institutional buyers, the big investors who once scooped up entire neighborhoods, were quietly backing out. Builders were panicking, cutting prices, throwing in free upgrades, anything to move the unsold homes piling up like unwanted stock. Homeowners were calling into state offices, furious and frightened, watching the value of their homes sink while their mortgage payments stayed painfully high. And through it all, Hobbs had to stand there and pretend it was under control. Except it wasn't. And everyone in that room knew it. Her frustration wasn't just about politics, it was personal. Arizona's whole image, its identity even, had been built on the idea of endless growth. Sunshine, wide open spaces, affordable homes, opportunity. For decades, that was the story they sold to the rest of America. But that story was falling apart on her watch, and it was doing so publicly. Every dip in home values was another blow to her administration's credibility. The governor who promised progress was now presiding over panic. When she snapped at a reporter who questioned her housing policy, the clip went viral within hours. Some called it the moment the mask slipped. Others said it was the first honest emotion we've seen from a politician in years. Either way, it was raw. The kind of moment that sticks because it's too real. Her voice cracked as she admitted that the state was facing unprecedented market challenges. Translation? Arizona was in trouble, and there was no easy fix. Behind the scenes, aides scrambled to spin it. They said she was passionate, emotional, human. But insiders whispered a different story, that the governor had been warned for months about the slowdown and ignored the early signs. She didn't want to believe the boom was over, not after years of Arizona being hailed as the next great housing success story. Her panic wasn't just about the economy, it was about legacy. What happens to a leader when the very foundation of her state starts to crumble right beneath her feet? That press conference became a turning point. It wasn't just another bad day in politics. It was the moment Arizona's glossy real estate dream met reality. The cameras caught every blink, every sigh, every crack in her composure. And for the people watching at home, homeowners, investors, everyday Arizonans, it felt like watching the truth finally hit the surface. The governor was losing her grip, and so was the market. Buyers vanish, sellers freeze. The meltdown at that press conference was just the spark. The real explosion came afterward. Within weeks, the numbers coming out of Arizona's housing market looked like something out of a disaster movie. Buyers were vanishing overnight. Home sales fell through at record rates. People who had put down deposits were walking away, even if it meant losing thousands. They'd rather eat the loss than be trapped in a mortgage for a house that was already losing value. Across Phoenix, Tucson, and the surrounding suburbs, for sale signs started multiplying like weeds. Entire streets that were once buzzing with open houses suddenly fell silent. Sellers were in shock. Many had bought at the top of the market, convinced prices would only go higher. Realtors had promised them that Arizona always rebounds, But that confidence had evaporated. Homes that used to sell in a week were now sitting for 60, 90, even 100 days with no offers. Some desperate sellers started slashing prices every few weeks just to attract attention. But buyers weren't biting. They were scared too. Mortgage rates were brutal, and every new headline about a collapsing market made people hesitate even more. It became a standoff. No one wanted to buy, and no one could afford to sell. The emotional toll was even worse. Homeowners who had worked for years to save a down payment were now underwater, owing more than their houses were worth. Families who thought they'd finally made it were suddenly calculating how long they could keep up payments before foreclosure became inevitable. Neighborhoods that had once symbolized Arizona's dream of sun-soaked success were starting to look abandoned. Lawns went brown, construction halted mid-frame. You could drive through new developments and see the ghostly outlines of ambition, half-built homes, empty driveways, and mailboxes with no names. Investors saw it coming and ran first. Big funds that had been buying hundreds of homes at a time quietly backed out, leaving local builders holding the bag. Those builders, once unstoppable, began offering absurd incentives, free upgrades, closing cost coverage, even mortgage buydowns, just to move product. But nothing could hide the fact that Arizona's housing party was over. The bubble had popped, and the hangover had arrived. In the middle of it all, Governor Hobbs was caught between political pressure and public outrage. Her phone lines were flooded with calls from constituents begging for help, tax relief, mortgage aid, anything. But there was little she could do. Interest rates weren't set in Arizona, and the state's economy was too tied to real estate to pivot quickly. Watching buyers disappear and sellers crumble wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a psychological one. Arizona's confidence, that famous swagger of a booming state, was gone. The fallout was contagious. Local banks began tightening credit, nervous about defaults. Small businesses that depended on new homeowners, furniture stores, landscapers, contractors, saw sales plunge. The ripple effect was undeniable. One bad deal became 10 became hundreds, and suddenly the entire state felt like it was holding its breath. The dream of endless growth had frozen solid, and Arizona's leaders had no idea how to thaw it out. The cities that cracked first. When the panic spread, it didn't hit evenly. Some cities buckled faster than others, and the cracks showed where Arizona had stretched itself too thin. Phoenix, the state's golden child, was the first to wobble. Home prices there had soared nearly 50% during the boom, but by 2025, they were already sliding backward. Downtown lofts that once sold in bidding wars now sat empty. In the suburbs, those flashy new subdivisions, the ones that promised affordable luxury, turned into financial traps. Streets that were supposed to represent progress started to look more like graveyards of overconfidence. In Lake Havasu City, the crash hit with a poetic kind of irony. A town built on fake London bridges and endless parties was suddenly dead quiet. Home values that had doubled between 2020 and 2022 were tanking, and the listings told the story. Hundreds of homes with slashed prices, desperate sellers, and barely any buyers. The same retirees who had moved there for an easy life were now calling their financial advisors in panic. Even worse, water shortages and insurance issues made owning property there a nightmare. Who wants a lakeside home when the lake itself is shrinking and your insurance company just dropped you? Then came Prescott Valley, the once cute escape town turned investor hotspot. Prices had shot up over 80% in just a few years, fueled by out-of-state buyers and remote workers. But that fantasy was unraveling fast. Remote work was fading, Californians stopped relocating, and suddenly the so-called Colorado of Arizona was losing its charm. The mountain views were still there, but the for sale signs outnumbered the pine trees. Builders who had once bragged about sold-out phases were now offering discounts and pleading for buyers to return. It was like a party that ended, but no one wanted to admit it. Casa Grande was next, the poster child of overbuilding. Developers had flooded the desert with new subdivisions, convinced the city would explode with growth. But what they got instead was a surplus of empty homes and an economy that couldn't catch up. Prices began dipping below $320,000, and buyers vanished faster than the promises of affordable living. Entire neighborhoods sat half-finished as builders quietly packed up and left. You could drive through those areas and feel the silence. Rows of identical houses all waiting for owners who never came. And then there was Surprise, the most ironically named city in Arizona. Everyone had expected endless growth, but the surprise was just how quickly it all fell apart. Its population had ballooned on cheap mortgages and long commutes. But once interest rates spiked and gas prices climbed, the math stopped working. People realized they were paying $500,000 to live an hour and a half from Phoenix with little to show for it. Jobs were scarce, crime rates were rising, and new buyers wanted nothing to do with it. But the most dramatic collapse came from the outskirts: Buckeye, Queen Creek, and Maricopa, the poster towns of Arizona's housing hysteria. These were the places marketed as the next Scottsdale, where young families and investors rushed to buy pre-construction homes in the middle of nowhere. Buckeye was once the fastest-growing city in America, but when water rights were questioned and developers were blocked from building, the dream evaporated. In Queen Creek, builders approved 25,000 new homes, but demand dried up so badly that inventory now equals decades of supply. And Maricopa, oh Maricopa, the desert city that thought it could become a new hub between Phoenix and Tucson, is now a ghost of its own hype. Each of these cities tells the same story: a mix of greed, bad timing, and false confidence. Arizona believed its own legend that growth would never end and everyone wanted a piece of the desert. But when buyers started walking away, that illusion shattered. The crash didn't just expose the weakness of a few towns, it revealed the truth about the entire state. Arizona's boom wasn't built on stability or sustainability. It was built on speculation, and when the buyers disappeared, the whole house of cards came down with them. The real reason everyone's walking away. It's easy to blame the panic on buyers getting cold feet, but that's only part of the story. The truth runs deeper and uglier. Arizona's housing market wasn't just cooling. It was cracking under the weight of too many promises that could never be kept. The dream of cheap desert living was sold like a fairy tale, but behind the glossy billboards and model homes were math problems no one wanted to solve. Interest rates had exploded, insurance companies were fleeing, and water, the lifeblood of the desert, was running out. Buyers didn't just walk away, they woke up. The first domino was affordability. During the pandemic, people could buy homes with low interest rates and big dreams. Fast forward to today, and those same homes cost hundreds more a month in mortgage payments. The numbers stopped adding up. A house that felt like a steal in 2021 now looks like a financial trap. Many buyers, especially first-timers, realized they were signing up for debt that would drown them. And when they tried to renegotiate or delay, lenders refused. So they walked. Better to lose a deposit than lose their future. Then came the insurance crisis, the quiet killer of confidence. Major insurers started pulling out of high-risk zones, labeling entire neighborhoods as too dangerous because of floods, fires, or heat damage. Homeowners suddenly found themselves with canceled policies or skyrocketing premiums. Imagine paying $4,000 a year for insurance on a home that's already losing value. It was the final straw for many. If you can't insure your investment, what's the point of owning it? But perhaps the biggest punch to Arizona's market was the end of the remote work boom. During the pandemic, the state thrived on an influx of Californians, tech workers, and retirees looking for cheaper housing and sunshine. That wave has ended. Companies are calling workers back to the office, and those out-of-state migrants are quietly moving home. The stream of fresh buyers that once fueled Arizona's market has slowed to a trickle. Without that constant flow of new money, the inflated prices can't hold. And then there's the water problem, the one no one wanted to talk about. The Colorado River is shrinking, aquifers are drying, and some cities are already under construction bans due to water shortages. Who wants to buy a new home in a desert where future water access is uncertain? When developers can't guarantee water for the next 100 years, buyers don't just hesitate, they run. Institutional investors, the Wall Street giants that once bought entire neighborhoods, saw the storm coming early and started dumping properties quietly. They're leaving regular homeowners to deal with the fallout. The same hedge funds that fueled the boom by driving up prices are now retreating with their profits, leaving average Arizonans holding the bag. The truth is brutal but simple. People aren't walking away because they've lost interest. They're walking away because the system failed them. Arizona sold the dream of endless opportunity but forgot about reality. Interest rates, climate risks, insurance, and sustainability. The buyers aren't the villains in this story. They're just the first ones smart enough to see the ending before the credits roll. The sad part? For everyone else still holding on, the show isn't over. It's just getting started. From pride to panic. When the market started to unravel, the numbers were bad, but the emotions were worse. Arizona's homeowners went from feeling like winners to wondering how it all went wrong so fast. You could feel the shift in conversations, in community Facebook groups, in the tone of voices at coffee shops. A year ago, people bragged about their rising home values. Now they whisper about canceled listings, missed payments, and neighbors moving out overnight. The pride that came with home ownership in Arizona, that feeling of "we made it," had turned into quiet panic. For families who bought at the top of the market, the pain hit hardest. They had done everything right, saved for years, fought through bidding wars, and finally got their dream home. Then came the rising rates, insurance cancellations, and the sinking realization that their home was worth less than their mortgage. They couldn't sell without losing money, and they couldn't refinance without paying more. It's the kind of trap that keeps you up at night. Parents started cutting back on groceries just to cover mortgage payments, while kids overheard arguments about maybe renting again. The American dream, the one Arizona sold so well, had turned into a financial nightmare. Retirees who had flocked to the state for sunshine and affordability weren't spared either. Many had cashed out of California or Illinois, only to discover that the cheaper life came with brutal heat waves, rising costs, and evaporating home equity. Their fixed incomes couldn't keep up with skyrocketing utility bills and maintenance costs. Some were forced to sell at a loss just to downsize again. The cruel irony of retiring twice in one decade. You could see the heartbreak in their eyes, the disbelief that what was once their reward for decades of work had become a burden they could barely afford. Even renters got caught in the fallout. When investors pulled out and new construction slowed, rental prices spiked and the supply of affordable housing shrank. People who once dreamed of buying realized they couldn't even find stable rentals. It was as if the entire housing ecosystem, buyers, sellers, renters, collapsed under its own weight. Communities that once felt tight-knit began to unravel. For sale signs became reminders of defeat, and empty driveways told silent stories of families who just couldn't hang on. Meanwhile, Governor Hobbs was watching it all unfold in real time. Every report that crossed her desk was worse than the last. Home values falling, mortgage delinquencies rising, foreclosures creeping up. The calls from angry residents were relentless. Some wanted action, others wanted someone to blame. Her face during press conferences said what her words didn't. She was out of answers. Her frustration, her outbursts, her public slip-ups. They weren't just political cracks. They were human ones. You could tell the pressure was breaking her. The meltdown wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the collective heartbreak of a state that had believed in its own myth. The myth that Arizona would always grow, that property values would always climb, that sunshine could fix everything. When that illusion shattered, it didn't just hurt wallets, it broke spirits. People stopped believing in the idea of forever homes. They started realizing that even paradise can lose its shine when built on unstable ground. And that's the tragedy Arizona wasn't ready to face. The market didn't just crash, it took people's faith down with it. The real estate frenzy didn't happen by accident. It was the product of overconfidence, greed, and a refusal to plan for the limits of a desert state. Arizona's economy became dangerously dependent on construction and housing, industries that thrive only when the bubble keeps expanding. When it burst, everything connected to it suffered. Local businesses saw their customers disappear, cities lost property tax revenue, and thousands of workers were left scrambling for jobs. The crash exposed just how fragile that booming economy really was. It wasn't diversification. It was speculation dressed up as progress. Governor Hobbs's breakdown came to symbolize that moment of reckoning. Her visible frustration wasn't just about the numbers. It was about the weight of leading a state addicted to endless expansion. She inherited a system that had been sprinting toward a wall for years, and she was the one forced to watch it collide. Every promise of prosperity, every ribbon cutting at a new housing development, every glowing headline about Arizona's growth, it all came crashing down at once. The meltdown was more than emotional, it was symbolic. It showed that the people in charge were finally realizing what regular Arizonans had been feeling all along. Things were spinning out of control. The housing crash wasn't just a financial crisis, it was a cultural one. For decades, Arizona sold the fantasy that anyone could move there and build a perfect life under clear skies. That fantasy blinded people to the cracks forming beneath the surface. The rising costs, the climate strain, the overdevelopment. The end of that illusion feels like the end of an era. But maybe, just maybe, it's also the beginning of something healthier. A chance to rebuild smarter, slower, and stronger. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.